member demanding the ayes and nays?
Is a member demanding the ayes and nays?
Okay, motion is adopted.
The motion is adopted.
House stands adjourned until 8.
The House stands adjourned until 8 p.m. tonight.
Who, for the foreseeable future, is the chief presiding officer of the U.S. House of Representatives. The House of Representatives doesn't actually exist right now because there is no speaker to lead it, because Republicans, holding a narrow majority, have been unable to elect a speaker. There was a motion you saw just a moment ago from Tom Cole, Republican of Oklahoma, to adjourn. That was put before the House, and by a voice vote, Republicans prevailed. So the House will be in adjournment until 8 p.m. this evening, whereupon it will reconvene. It hopes, that is to say, Republicans hope, there will be some path to resolving what has been now a 2-day stalemate over the question of who will lead not only Republicans, but Democrats as Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House leads both parties institutionally. It's not good enough for Kevin McCarthy, the California Republican, to have a majority of his conference behind him. He needs a majority of the fully constituted House. He has been unable to obtain that, not once, but now 6 consecutive times. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe and CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns have been, as you've seen all day, doggedly and intrepidly following all the developments on the House floor, and they join me now. Ed, let me start with you. Your impressions of the day as we know it at this hour.
Well, I think it gives us a new living, breathing definition of a standoff and a stalemate, because we haven't seen much movement at all, really, in the numbers throughout the day. There had been talk this morning of doing what they just did, adjourning and waiting to come back to the full House later after House Republicans had a closed-door, come-to-Jesus kind of conversation with themselves about how to proceed. But there wasn't enough support this morning, it would appear, to do that, which forced them to go into a 4th, 5th, and 6th round, right? I'm losing count of votes that, once again, over and over, showed Kevin McCarthy with about 201 votes in his favor, 20 or so voting for Byron Donalds today, this congressman from Southwest Florida, and, of course, 212 Democrats holding united behind Hakeem Jeffries, their new House leader. So we're still at an impasse. What exactly do these 21 members want? They want resolution, but many of them don't want it to be Kevin McCarthy. Or if it's going to be Kevin McCarthy, they want certain procedural or committee rules or assignments designated before they can go forward to support. There's a bloc that continues remarkably to vote together, right, but many of them have differing and in some cases probably competing agendas or reasons to be withholding support from McCarthy. Remember, you need a majority of the full House, not just your majority caucus. McCarthy lacks that still, and now they have about 3.5 hours to see if they can come to some kind of a resolution, Major.
And Caitlin, the Republicans have some hope that this conversation privately can resolve something. It's not, though, that they haven't been conversing with each other in full public view on C-SPAN all day long. It's not as if they haven't been trying to resolve this. They're just going to try to resolve it in private now.
Exactly. I mean, we've seen, courtesy of the C-SPAN cameras, that they have been conversing. We saw some heated conversations, it looked like, between Matt Gaetz and Mike Gallagher as an example. But a question that we had going into today was, would there be any chipping away of this coalition opposing McCarthy? And we found out today that the answer is no. And in fact, it has grown more emboldened throughout the course of the day. Notably, earlier in the day, you had former President Donald Trump urging this group to just vote for McCarthy, support him, and you saw one of the members, Lauren Boebert of Colorado, say, hey, Mr. Former President, why don't you tell McCarthy to back off? So that kind of gives you a sense of where we are right now. You have a group that has not only stayed together, but has dug in their heels. McCarthy's allies have been trying trying to make the case today that McCarthy, looking at basic math within the conference, has more votes than anyone else, and if not him, then who? But at the same time, to Ed's point, that's not the rule. Those aren't the rules of the game here. You have to get a majority of those voting, and he does not have that. So there is this lingering question of what could actually happen between closed doors that presumably hasn't happened already, that presumably hasn't happened over the past month or so as they have tried to eke this out. And we could come back here at 8 o'clock with a similar scenario. And
the risk here, Major, and we talked about this earlier in the day as you began to notice this happen, members are getting cranky. They're getting impatient. They want to move on. And we know what happens, especially among House Republicans, with all due respect, when that happens. It gets personal. It gets nastier. And what's interesting to me, and you've followed this closely, of course, over the last several years, Caitlin, Major, you as well, they tweet this animosity at each other quite regularly. Now they've been doing it face-to-face with all eyes of the world watching. And that is a whole new level of discontent and disunity in the Republican Party that we haven't seen. And to see someone like Lauren Boebert, conservative, hero to many in the MAGA crowd, turn to the former president and say, don't tell me what to do, why don't you go tell Mr. McCarthy what to do, exposes yet again there is no titular or actual head of this party right now who can dictate what exactly should be happening.
And to your point, Ed, Warren Davidson of Ohio, when he was giving his speech nominating Kevin McCarthy as Speaker, I think before the fourth vote or the fifth vote, like you, I've lost track, said, well, there's a certain number of us who don't trust Kevin McCarthy. Well, there's a certain number of the majority of the Republican conference who don't trust those who don't trust Kevin McCarthy. Explaining in vivid terms, rhetorically, that there is a deep reservoir of mistrust within the House Republican ranks. Now, all three of us in this conversation have known that's been true for some time. But it's always been discussed privately, and it's been discussed in a way to make that less publicly visible and resolvable on the sidelines. It is now no longer a sideline conversation. It is front and center. And those people have just publicly said, I don't trust you, and having it answered back or clapped back, as the kids might say, I don't trust you either, have to go into a conference room, look each other in the eye, and try to figure out a way out. And that, to me, doesn't appear clear to me. I don't think it appears clear to you. And more importantly, if Kevin McCarthy were a part of this conversation, no longer three-way, but four-way, he wouldn't be able to explain it to us either.
And Major, I appreciate the reference to a clapback. I think that gives us all some street cred up here, so thank you for that. But you're exactly right, and I think even if we do get to some kind of conclusion here, whether it ends up being McCarthy, which seems more and more unlikely as the hours pass, or whether there is someone else that emerges, the problems are going to be exactly the same. You are going to have this kind of dogfight on nearly any piece of legislation, particularly the ones that come to major consequence, raising the debt ceiling, budgets, bills, government funding, all of those kinds of things.
Offering amendments on the floor, holding a floor debate like they've been holding for the last 24 hours. Yeah, I mean, it's quite something. It really is quite something. And look, we know there are a lot of viewers. Frankly, we have a lot of colleagues because we've been getting the text and emails all day. Wondering, okay, fine, McCarthy, get out of the way. What about Steve Scalise? What about Elise Stefanik? What about Jim Jordan? I mean, yes, those are options, but it doesn't appear that McCarthy is willing to go there yet. Because he has insisted this was going to be a shirts versus skins kind of stare down there on the floor of the House, and he would outlast it as long as possible. The question is, will his 221 colleagues in the House Republican Conference agree with him that this should go another day, or potentially several more days into next week?
And we should note that former Congressman Fred Upton told us earlier today that this is not even halftime yet, in his view. Byron Donalds also telling Nicole Killian that this is really just the beginning, and didn't have a sense of urgency to get this done, at least not today, not tomorrow, maybe not for the rest of the week.
And for those of you wondering, as Ed said out loud, what about Steve Scalise, who's next in line? He would be the majority leader. He is the deputy, the lieutenant right behind Kevin McCarthy. Steve Scalise can do nothing. He can do nothing to suggest he wants the position until Kevin McCarthy essentially abdicates and takes his name out of it. Why do I say that? Having talked to a lot of people in and around this debate in Republican circles on Capitol Hill, that would be disloyal, and it's something that Steve Scalise has promised Kevin McCarthy he would not do. That Kevin McCarthy has to make the first move, and until he does, or less than until he does, Steve Scalise will not proffer his name as an alternative. That's one of the things that holds this in sort of a suspended animation. Kevin McCarthy wants the speakership, says he has earned it, told his colleagues yesterday in their face-to-face conference meeting, I'm not going away. All of that credibility is on the line as long as he stays in the race. When he backs out and officially makes it that he's backed out, which I'm not predicting, but as Caitlin just indicated, very well may have to happen, only then can alternatives step forward.
And remember, many of those 2021 who are withholding support from McCarthy have said Scalise is kind of part of the problem, too. Because while he may not have been around and in active House Republican Conference leadership as long or as actively as McCarthy, they believe he's part of the problem as the number two, the whip, the vote counter, when it comes to the issues of we don't have a say in this unless we're on the committee. We don't get to propose amendments. We don't even get to hold floor debates down here. We don't get to have serious Republican, lowercase c conservative conversations about federal spending and finding ways to cut spending because our Republican leaders go cut deals with Democrats, and then budgets get passed with a majority of Democrats and a smaller group of Republicans. That's not Republican governing. So we'll see if even Scalise could be the alternative. It's part of why we saw early on a suggestion that maybe Jim Jordan, the incoming chairman or presumed incoming chairman of the Judiciary Committee, would be a better alternative because he's been one of those with the rank and file conservatives and not in leadership. We'll see.
Then you have the question, too, of what you do to gain others. Do you repel others that have been with you as well? So a very fragile coalition.
Fragile indeed, because it's a coalition that does not exist in any publicly discernible way. Ed O'Keefe, Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you so much. Be sure, that is to say, to stick around for Red and Blue with me. That's starting at 5 p.m. Eastern for more on this story.
Everybody wakes up in the morning and they are pelted with alerts that frighten them, news that agitates them. With this show, we have the time to explain what's going on. These migrants, they've been released. Explain the status that allows them to be released, to slow things down a little bit. What are the big sets of questions for China and its ambitions? Hackers are stepping up their attacks to extort victims. Let's start with easy. Who's attacking? Here's